So really what I want to find out is what are you here to hear about? What are you interested in learning about? Because we have some of the top experts in the country, if not the world, on interactive and new forms of advertising on all the new media platforms. Give me a sense of, who's from the distribution side of the business? Content creation? Network? Infrastructure? So it's mixed. What would you like to hear about? What would you like to hear about?
My question is, as audiences get more and more fragmented, how important is it will be for advertisers to reach a mass audience versus trying to go after
Well, good, great question. Did everyone hear that question?
I can't hear the question.
Could you stand up and just
Sure.
repeat it? I'll put that on the microphone for you.
Right. My question was, as audience gets more and more fragmented, how important is it to advertisers to reach a mass audience versus going after their small segments?
Well, we were just talking about that over lunch. So who wants to start out on that one? Andy?
Yeah, from Comcast perspective, we don't think that there's necessarily a single silver bullet in terms of aggregating impressions in a single spot, but rather being able to aggregate across platforms and across content to be able to deliver that audience. And that may be from a linear product standpoint, it may be from a broadband standpoint, it may be from an on-demand, non-linear infrastructure standpoint. So our suggestion is that with the viewer increasingly in control of consuming content when they want to consume the content, it's incumbent upon the advertisers now to move to where the viewer is. Historically, an advertiser, and I used to work in the advertising agency business, and media was sort of the last 5 minutes of every client presentation, and you bought the Seven Sisters and a couple of early fringe spots, and away you go. You could put a flag post in the ground, and the consumers would come to you. Well, now the dynamic has shifted. Advertisers now need to move to where the consumer is. And we don't think that there's any one single panacea that will enable an advertiser to aggregate impressions in one particular spot. It's how do you develop creative strategies and media strategies across platforms to aggregate those audiences.
Andy, what's Comcast doing in that world?
Well, we think there are three fundamental shifts that are going on in the advertising marketplace as an industry. We think the first thing that's occurring is the level of precision is increasing, the ability to deliver a specific audience. And that level of precision is what we might call addressability, but the ability to deliver either a linear or nonlinear ad to a set household or set of households. So the ability for a BMW, for making it up, to deliver a 30-second commercial to a BMW household that's in a 3rd year or 3-year lease. So the first thing that we see that is occurring is that the level of precision is increasing. And that's really sort of aperture, the right product at the right place at the right time, making sure that we have an infrastructure that does that. The second level, the second sort of tentpole that we see occurring in our business is that the level of engagement is increasing. And the level of engagement is really being driven around DVR, TiVo-like functionality where the consumer's in control, but it's also being driven by broadband and VOD functionality. So how do we build ad models into that space as well? And the third leg that we see, precision engagement, the third leg is really the level of accountability is increasing. We'll talk more about that. But how do we develop and build ad models across that spectrum of platforms?
So Dean, you were telling me some interesting things Charter is doing.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of things with interactivity. And I believe the question was, is how are we going to, is still reaching the mass audience still going to be important as opposed to the segmented audience? And it's still going to be important for advertisers to reach the whole audience. What we feel is that it's about reaching the right person and how to serve that particular ad per set-top box. So that's the direction we're going in. And you'll be able to have an agency, probably donut, if you could think of a beginning, a middle, and an end, have 5 variations. I just recently saw this in New York, and they can come up with 150 different combinations depending on the demographic, and that will be served to a specific set-top box. So if you're watching specific programs that are geared towards women, you're going to get one set of ads, and if you're a male or a young male, you might get a second set of ads. So when you aggregate that all together, you're still going to reach your mass audience, but you're going to be able to serve them individually.
Marty, what's Disney do?
You know, Dean and I is funny. We're having a little behind the table debate just as this was getting underway, and I would say it was exactly on that question. I think that is exactly the key question in the industry right now, although it usually isn't stated. And I think the answer to why the mass audience should be one of the focuses, not the sole focus, but certainly a primary focus, is a one-word answer: money. That's where the biggest amounts are. That's where the biggest amounts will remain. It's the one place you can't get them anywhere else. Nobody delivers the mass audience like TV does, even close. And advertisers have always paid a premium for that, not just because it's important to reach the mass audience, it's also important to reach a finely targeted audience. But there are many ways, the internet being a particularly good one, to reach a finely targeted audience. There are very few ways to reach a mass audience, a huge national mass audience. And therefore, you find that the dollars available, even in this day and age of interactivity and everything else, targetability, the dollars and the premiums available for mass audience advertising dwarf anything else. Now, I'm a huge fan of addressability. I think it's a very important layer of functionality to supply to advertisers. But the money is sitting there right now in huge sums waiting to say, the traditional 30 is there, it reaches tens of millions of people at a shot. How can I enhance it? How can I say that you know what, maybe you're skipping the commercial, maybe you're not interested, blah, blah, blah. But maybe you are. Maybe I've got a contest going on that says you can win this car. Maybe you get a free coupon. Maybe this, that, the other thing. All you have to do is say, yeah, all right, yes, one click in my remote control. That is taking all of 100% of the value that the 30-second commercial currently provides and adding an entirely new layer for no additional time spent and incredibly little effort spent on the consumer's part. It's a real value proposition to the consumer. And not only does the advertiser get, because the set-top box is so intelligent, get to know who did it, when, what offers, for what reason, and I actually generate qualified leads, but they get data of the kind that there's a lot of hunger for in terms of, gee, you know what? That same ad got a response on CBS and it didn't get it on NBC. That same ad got a response in the Northwest, didn't get it in the Southeast. That same ad got it in primetime, didn't get it in daytime. The kind of data that any advertiser, any marketer lives and dies for, and it's available now. The key, though, is they pay for it on a premium level, on a mass basis. And that means the same type of technology, some level of functionality standardization has to exist across all platforms, satellite, cable, telco, across all networks, cable, broadcast, whatever. Some level of standardization, basically, so that you can then build from there and prove that the industry can get its act together and offer this kind of value.
Ken,
Sorry for the speech.
No, not at all. Ken, what kind of measurement is out there now that can be used for this?
Well, in the case of our company, we're attempting to approach this from a census-based tracking level so that the notion of targeting down to a set-top box can be captured. So we're capturing today in video on demand about processing data for about 30 million set-top boxes a day across the platforms that we're on, primarily with Comcast, but other MSOs as well. So we're able to go down to a set-top level so that the targeting can not only be utilized, but also it can be counted at a transactional level. So, and that information is only going to get better and better as the VOD server manufacturers add more and more features.
How do you deal with privacy concerns when you get to the set-top box level?
Well, in VOD, the good thing about it is from a technological standpoint, we don't have to go to the set-top to get the data because it's served off of a server. So by understanding what's being served, you understand what's being consumed. But I can't speak to it, but some of my colleagues from the cable MSOs on
Yeah,
the table here could
I think
talk
it's-
about the set-top level for linear.
I think it's important to recognize that the cable MSO business is in a franchise business, and we can't violate any federal cable act or any other legislation that would violate some around the issue of privacy, violate the standards that are in place. So in the linear, we're going to be launching, Comcast and the other MSOs will be launching linear trials of addressability, the ability to insert a 30-second commercial to an ESPN household based on either third-party data, Experian-like client data. But we will marry that, our subscriber file with that third-party data and strip out any personally identifiable information. So it becomes an anonymous data set. We may identify that in the Miami marketplace there are 10,142 households that BMW wants to speak to. We wouldn't say that it's Terry Beanstalk's address. Now, if there is the opportunity for an opt-in environment, either in a linear fashion and a nonlinear fashion, and there's a sweepstakes or a contest or something that allows a viewer to opt into that database, then we're able to share that subscriber's information with that advertiser. But in a non-opt-in environment, it would be purely anonymized through a third party like an Experian.
Questions? I'd really like to get is what people are thinking about, what they want to have answers to. So please interact.
Can I talk about Terry?
Yeah, sure.
Are you on the content side or the, on the distribution side?
Me?
Yeah, yes.
Content and
All right. Well, so I think at the end of the day, this, at least to that question on advertising, is what problem essentially is the ad industry trying to solve? And the big problem they're trying to solve is that they have this portfolio of media investments, so there's General Motors with $4.4 billion, that they're throwing more and more money at every year to a shrinking and shrinking audience, and that's the mass network television. The question, the second part of the question is, on the answer side, do these niche networks solve the problem?
And what is your experience?
And I run a, I have a niche network, and long story short is no, it doesn't, because the main problem is the media buyers have a certain amount of people who work there. They work a certain number of hours a day. The proliferation of all these choices only makes their job harder. It doesn't make their job easier. So some people have to come in and fill in, and that's where Comcast has the opportunity, Cox and those guys have the opportunity now, that they can aggregate all these niche networks and all this potential targeting, once they get, all those layers built on top of, the physical plant that they've spent a lot of money upgrading. Once they get all those tracking layers, then they can go back and you can still spend the same amount of money, but you can get it targeted at a bunch of niches. Now we're in a niche that's hip hop and urban, and right now it's the lingua franca of pop culture. But as far as delivering it in terms of media, it's still considered a niche. In the way that we are able to deliver. We deliver it on demand today, and soon we'll be delivering it in broadband video. We only solve a tiny piece of a problem for our sponsors, General Motors and Coke. That we have on an annual basis, and we only solve a tiny problem for them. Fortunately, we've been able to get their attention, and keep them in the deal and get them to renew. But the biggest challenge is now how do we launch more networks and more media after our niche, so that at least within our niche we offer the advertiser the greatest amount of scale. That's going to be the biggest challenge for a niche targeted program in place.
So are you finding it harder or easier in this environment as it gets more and more niche?
Well, I ain't seen easy. So I don't want to say it's getting harder, but I'm not even close enough to easy to say it's getting easier. It really is a challenge, because if you're in the two that we're dealing with are two of the top 5 advertisers in the world, and I'm trying to give them, a couple $1 million solution to what is a $4.4 billion problem for General Motors, and for Coke, it's a $2 billion problem. So, so the story that we tell, which resonates to a certain extent, which is that if we get what we're trying to do together right, with the way we integrate the advertising, the way we take advantage, on the DVR platform with the interactive tags and fast forward skipping logo commercials, if we can get that part right, then we have a we have a content solution or programming solution that you could then scale to every other facet of the platform. So if you get it right for us, then you'll also be able to take that same formula to NBC. You'll be able to take that same formula to, MTV on demand. You'll be able to take it to Cutting Edge and all these other on-demand services if you can figure it out right with us.
I think it's important, just also the other side of Marty's point of the irony of a declining broadcast audience, yet rising CPMs in that space, really because they're the last bastion of a single aggregated universe. The flip side of it also is to think about the advertising agency industry and their compensation model, because the ad agency is being asked to do more with less, and their margins are getting squeezed significantly. And the reality is the landscape is becoming more complex, not less. And when they look at their bottom line and their compensation model, their greatest return is in the network national environment. That's where they make their most money. They don't have to staff to the degree that they would need to take advantage of some of these other opportunities. So part of it is driven by the fact that this mass audience is the only mass audience. Part of it also is how the currency and the sort of internal financial model for the ad agency industry as a whole.
Well, let's talk, while we're on you guys, let's talk about VOD and what advertising is, how it's shaped up on the video demand platform. What have you seen happen? What are the success stories? What are the failures in video on demand and advertising over the past year? Will, why don't we start with you?
Well,
Talk about what you've seen.
we started out
on the
with
content side.
we started out with 3 annual sponsors. We sold 5, 2 we didn't take because the way we wanted to try to integrate.
Why don't you describe for everyone what your content is?
We have a hip hop and urban video on demand service. We have video mixes, dance battles, MC battles, artist documentaries, bios, ton of artist interviews. Some of them, I'm assuming, hopefully some in this room have heard of, 50 Cent, Jay-Z, Beyonce, your cousins, kids, nephews, they all know about them. And we focus on that and cultural zeitgeist within the urban market. And we program roughly 6 hours a month. The average title is about 10 minutes per. We have VJ personalities, which most of our VJs are either. We have one model who was on Video Vixen's show, Sarah. She's very popular because people watch that show on MTV. We have another one, Ebro, who's a host personality on Hot 97, which is like the main arbiter of culture in New York City. And then we have DJ Vlad, who's for 4 years in a row as our VJ personalities. And we were the first VOD service that hosted personalities to the service, the first ones to really do integrated, motion graphics, the logos, the whole nine. Like when you turn on our service, it's not just like you're going to see a clip of something, but it starts out with, we rebranded in July to H2O, which is Hip Hop on Demand. You're going to be immersed in that. We kind of look at ourselves as the Fox News of hip hop. So you're going to get that feeling, and we program the look and feel so that when you turn the volume down, the screen is still screaming at you. And that's, kind of our focus. And it turned out to be popular. We launched last November. We tripled our usage. We're one of the top 5 VOD pure plays on the service. And then, the next stage for us. So what we did is, we started out with Coke, General Motors, Reebok.
What were the forms of the ads?
Well, you start out with, you host it, each title gets its own sponsor, so there's just the regular VJ comes up, hosts a segment, then there are motion graphics that come on. In the case of Sprite, we have a ton of sound effects, of the refresh sound. Then when they launched the Subliminal campaign, we had a bunch of, you are now subliminally, designing Sprite. I wish I should have brought a reel, a lot of it you just have to see, but it's over the top in your face. And in our culture, it works because Sprite is a known quantity since the very beginning in hip hop. They were the first ones to use rappers in their ad campaigns in the late 80s. So Sprite is a big piece of the culture. With GM, Chevy had a couple of cars that we were really pushing, like the Impala, which is a very hood car, and then the Tahoe, which is very popular, SUV. That people trick out a lot. So they had the right products, and then Reebok obviously is heavily into the business, but Reebok was very difficult as a sponsor, because they had a lot of assumptions from television buys that just don't apply to on demand. There's no dynamic ad insertion. Once we bake an ad on, it's not like it's going to instantly come down. The whole title has to come down. A bunch of challenges that made us feel like we were probably better off without their money. General Motors, it presents a different challenge because they had 3 brands in the deal, so they kind of got a 3-for-1 on us, and so we were servicing those guys. But Sprite has been a dream. What we decided for going into the second year is that we would forget about the advertising part, focus on building out our distribution, only retain Sprite, and over-deliver for Sprite, and then go back out into the market next year when dynamic ad insertion is available on Comcast, and then sell our other sponsors. So hopefully people in this room, at least, who are kind of in tune to it, will hear a lot about what we're doing with Sprite in 2007, so that we can show a model to the rest of the advertisers how you integrate on demand. We have broadband in that.
What's the delivery platform? I'm sorry, I missed the delivery platform on this.
We're on video on demand now, but we're
Okay.
launching broadband video and mobile companions, and we're starting to do in 2007 a ton of live events.
Braxton, what are the platform, what's happening on the platform side of, for advertisers in video on demand world?
Well, it's sort of public knowledge that Comcast is rolling out our technology to do dynamic ad insertion. I don't want to speak for Comcast, but I will say the technology allows for an operator to do a lot of those things that you want, which is dynamically updating an ad separate from the actual content itself. So you could pitch out a VOD asset. It could live there for a month or two, but you can update the ad daily or weekly. You can also target it down to whatever criteria you want. We have the data, the actual set-top MAC address and a few other pieces of data, and the technology can target as granular as everybody wants to go. That's being rolled out right now at Comcast, and then what we're seeing is probably in 2007. There'll be at least 1, perhaps 2 other major operators that roll that out to all their markets, and really try to deliver on the promise of a large audience with the ability to target and then measure and report back on those plays.
Terry, going back to your question in terms of the forms of VOD advertising, I think it's worth framing for the group the sort of platforms within VOD, and just using Comcast as a representative of the group, we have about 10 million VOD-enabled households across our footprint of 23.5 million subscribers, give or take. And we generate about 180 million VOD orders per month across that 10 million subscriber base. And when you look at VOD, think of it in 3 buckets. Think of it as subscription on demand, Sopranos, HBO. Think of it pay on demand, $5 for Braveheart. And the third bucket is free on demand content, and that may be what Will is describing and any number of other content providers. And when you look at the business model that we have, is probably about 95% of all the content we're going to acquire in on-demand is going to be in that free bucket. We're going to put it in that free bucket, and the good news is that's where the ad plays are going to lie. We're not going to put an ad in front of Braveheart, at least anytime soon. We're not going to put an ad in front of Sopranos anytime soon. So the vast majority of the content, 95+%, is going to go in that free bucket, and that's where the ad plays are going to reside. And currently, of the 180 million views, give or take, about 10 million of them go to pay on demand, Braveheart. 10% of them go to Braveheart. Probably about 30% of them go to the subscription on demand, the Sopranos, and about 60% go to that free bucket. So 60% of the 180 million is going to that free bucket that Will describes, and that's where the ad plays are going to reside. And really, in terms of the ad models themselves, there's what Will describe as sort of pre-roll, kind of post-roll, brand insertion, brand integration opportunities and content that's in the on-demand platform. Then there's also the long-form opportunity where advertisers produce and control their own content, and we serve as a distribution mechanism for it. So General Motors, for example, has 8 or 10 videos on their new product lineup that may be 7 minutes and link each. The ability for us to distribute that content, link from a commercial telescoping 30-second linear spot into that long-form content. So really long-form content and sponsorable content are the two kind of general buckets that we find in the on-demand ad model.
Dean, what are you doing on telescoping?
Right now in LA, we're up to 300,000 households where we can, if you take a 30-second spot announcement, we can program up to 4 buttons on the remote control. And one of those is telescoping right into a long-form asset, or we can even, if ESPN, for example, wanted to promote Monday Night Football, they could advertise on other networks and actually take people over to the Monday Night Football game. So that's what we're doing right now.
So-
Who's the operator? Sorry.
Sure.
Okay.
So what's working, what's not working on VOD in the advertising world?
Well, right now, the limitations is the dynamic ad insertion, because right now, to put advertising in there, it's really a challenge. Also, the navigation, I feel right now, is a challenge for the consumer as well, too. So those are probably the biggest limitations right now that we have to work through.
Well,
I think one other, if we're going to be honest about the situation, is all this stuff is wonderful. I really mean it sincerely. But it all comes with built-in constraints. As Andy was saying, it's free VOD. There's only a certain amount of inventory that you can attach to VOD, which is far less than you could attach to a normal program. You're automatically in DVR mode if you're on VOD, so your propensity to fast forward through an ad is that much greater than it would otherwise be. And it accounts for only a certain percentage of overall viewing. So when you add all those things, those constraints up, the scale, it's still a wonderful thing. It's a good thing. It's upside, but its scale has limits. And I think that's probably it's not really a negative comment on VOD, it's just putting it in perspective insofar as how much ad dollars are going to end up there out of the overall television ad dollar pie.
So where is Disney in this equation?
Well, we're very enthusiastic about it, and we're providing a lot of programming, particularly on Comcast in terms of free VOD, and we'll continue to do more, and it will contain advertising, pre-roll, post-roll, and so forth. And advertisers are enthusiastic about it, and we're happy to cater to their needs. But again, when you pencil it all out, you say, is that where the biggest part of the new types of advertising is going to be? It's going to be significant. My personal bet, not necessarily the company's, my personal bet is the bigger portion is going to come when you start with the big dollars to begin with, which is, believe it or not, the good old-fashioned traditional 30, where the $60 billion is already spent, and the ability to increase the value of that to the advertiser by 10% is a lot of money.
I just want to say, I mean, when you add VOD plus DVR usage plus broadband TV usage and compare that against, linear, I think that's a huge audience that's viewing, video in alternative forms, and I think actually, that segment is growing drastically, and I think that's a huge opportunity actually for, for operators and programmers to get together and take advantage of that audience that's growing, that's used to interacting, that, potentially advertisers can target and get all the things they like about sort of broadband TV and internet advertising, but hit people in their living room when they're, sitting on a couch and watching HDTV in VOD instead of, on a PC watching a quarter screen sort of thing. And I get the point that the big audience is still the linear audience on, the big networks, but at the same time, I think that everybody knows that segment is growing incredibly fast, and I think there's enough technology around to actually make all this happen. And I think, in particular, the programmers and the operators need to sort of get on the same page about the technology and the business deals to move that forward.
Let me just say that last point that you made is the point that I am most adamant about, and that is the various programmers and the various platform distributors have to get on the same page, because right now we're just not serving the client, the advertiser. to the maximum degree. The advertiser isn't going to solve these problems of incompatibility and lack of standardization. That's obviously up to us. So either we do it or it doesn't get done. Secondly, I just want to say I do agree that this is a great area. It's a wonderful area, as I said. It is growing much faster than anything else. But we tend to sometimes get blinded by that growth and forget the fact that, gee, we also have a tremendous opportunity if we can take the linear viewing audience and make it more effective. Yes, it's getting smaller, but it can also be made more effective, and that greater effectiveness can more than make up for the decrease in the viewing.
I remember one challenge last year, Marty, when we did this panel, was measurement. That was a big issue, and we had a gentleman from Nielsen in the audience, and a big controversy over the ability to measure as a great limitation in video on demand. Is that still there?
Yeah, again, it goes along with the standardization and the compatibility. You have clients. They have all these billions of dollars they're willing to spend on addressability, targetability, broadband, VOD, all these things. But if you don't do it in a way that caters to their needs and understanding of their business, as someone else in the panel just described, you know, they're going to find other places to put their money. Measurement and accountability, as Andy said, is hugely important to the clients. And either you find ways to do it, again, in a compatible fashion across all platforms, or it doesn't measure up to their criteria.
Well, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
The grand irony of that is that, you know, the 60 billion or whatever is spent right now on essentially, you know, a horse and buggy type of measurement.
That's right.
So the issue is VOD measurement is superior to the status quo measurement, but the hurdle to get into VOD in broadband video to a less extent because it's sort of more measurable, but the hurdle is much higher even though the measurement is superior to the status quo. I think when you start looking at these channels, like there's some channels that are pretty well insulated, like ESPN. There's not really a risk of VOD knocking out ESPN anytime soon. MTV and Viacom, in places where, you know, we have a show on MTV now, in places where the viewership is down, you have services like the #1 services on Comcast is Music Choice that does 36 million views a month. They average over 1 million viewers a day, which is the equivalent of MTV networks in a daily viewing session. That's a potential business that could really be impacted by video on demand. There are a couple other niches, like in kids, for instance. Nickelodeon, Nickelodeon in a Comcast produced service, Sprout, are really kind of duking it out because Sprout is probably, you know, you guys know better than Andy would know better than me, but Sprout is actually outdoing Nickelodeon on demand. And it has the ability to have inroads into the actual amount of linear viewing of Nickelodeon. And I think the way it's ultimately going to play out is you have the operators on one side, you know, like Comcast and Time Warner, who are trying to keep these programming fees down, are starting to create their own video on demand services. And once they have dynamic ad insertion, then their sales forces have the opportunity to go and make the case that we have as much or more media consumption on demand in this category than you are currently buying on linear television.
A couple of things I was going to add relative to a couple of the statements and the questions that have been asked. You asked, Terry, what things seem to be working in on-demand. What is working is that the commercial avoidance that Marty spoke about, in on-demand, we're finding that many of the content providers are putting very short 15, 11 second, 15 second, odd second ads, very short. And what happens at a consumer level often is that as consumers we habituate towards a behavior, and that behavior in this sense is by the time you try to fast forward through a 15-second spot, you miss the beginning of the program. After you do that 4 or 5 times, you get a little bit pissed at that, so you just watch it. So now you have this model like we have on the web where you in effect have forced viewing of an ad. And so what is working are these short ads that are upfront, and it's an uncluttered environment. And then the other point I was going to make is that Will mentioned Music Choice. They've been very successful in guaranteeing their advertisers' impressions because we have the ability to get trick mode data that will allow them to know how many people have fast-forwarded during an asset, and then they will throw those out if there was any fast-forwards in an asset. Because we can't yet, because there's no dynamic ad insertion yet, and there's, for most of the VOD server manufacturers, there's no timestamp in the stream, so you can't see where they fast-forwarded. And all that is coming, and then when that does come, we'll be able, at a set-top level, be able to say whether or not, how many impressions you really got. And to the point of the first question about the mass advertisers versus niche advertisers, I think in this on-demand environment, in this the way Comcast is looking at aggregating inventory across different platforms and different channels, we're going to be able, because of the data, to get really fine-tuned targeting. And if you're a product that's Pepsi Cola, you might want a mass audience, but if you're Nexium, you want a very particular audience. And so I think it depends upon the content type and the advertising type of which of these distribution plays best for an ad model.
We have some questions.
I think Ken actually answered my primary question well, and then what it looks like for that how they're working. But I think my next question really regarding telescoping, and what kind of user response rates are you seeing on an average, and how much does the creative play into that?
Well, creative plays into it a little bit, depending on the placement on the screen. We found that certain placement on the screen gets higher response. Again, it's an opt-in environment, so if it's something that the viewer really wants to watch, in other words, if it's a hospital, for example, and you really wanted to learn more about that hospital and that division of the hospital, that person, if they have that disease or whatever it is going to opt in for that. So it really depends on the level of response depending on the advertiser.
So in your trials, have you found there's commonality in terms of response rate by business category?
We're starting to get that right now, but really the telescoping's just begun in the last 4 or 5 months, so we don't have enough history yet to really answer that.
I'm sorry. I've only been at Disney for a year or so. Before that, I was at TiVo for a couple of years, and we focused almost exclusively on telescoping in terms of the advertising opportunity. And it was, you hit the nail on the head. It's highly content and highly category dependent. So movie trailers, big movie companies had a very high response rate and were very effective. Cars were somewhat effective. And as you might guess, a lot of packaged goods and so forth were not terribly effective. It really came down to, well, the movie trailer itself is entertaining. There's a real value add in that I'm really trying to decide what movie to watch to go to this weekend. And it's an entertaining experience. Because car companies like BMW were able to do the same thing with their little mini movies. Other car companies did a good job at that too. But it came down to these were partially about making a product choice and partially about an entertainment choice.
I'd like to add to that. There are some other things that telescoping does too that enhances the viewer experience. For example, if you're watching Monday Night Football on ESPN, we're working with the National Pizza Company where you can telescope right into a microsite and order a pizza while you're watching the game. So it really depends on the product too.
I want to go back, Terry, if I could, just to a point that Marty made previously and draw an analogy around the need for the importance of standards in our industry as we develop these new products. If you look at, and we were talking previously about big buckets of money in the linear space, if you look at the national spot advertising business, national spot TV business, it's about a, give or take, a $12 billion annual industry. And if you look at, if you add up all of the MSOs, if you look at the national spot cable business, it's about $1 billion industry, give or take. So here you have an industry that may represent on the cable side, give or take 50% of the GRPs, the media weight that's available in the marketplace. in the cable bucket, and here you have a bucket of GRPs called broadcast, it's 50% of the GRPs. Granted, in the cable bucket, they're more fragmented, much like we're describing in the media landscape. But you see 50-50 kind of distribution of viewing, but you see a distribution of dollars 90-10. And really, when you look at the evolution of our business in that sense, that 90-10 distribution of dollars is in part due to large GRPs, but it's also tied to the fact that I think we as an industry, on the cable operator side, allowed advertisers to cloud the strategic value of the product with lousy execution. We created the Tower of Babel that, the invasion of Europe was simpler than putting together a multi-market campaign across multiple MSOs. We can't recreate that same Tower of Babel in the nonlinear space because it will continue to simply be a niche product, regardless of the value that it may represent.
And hasn't that happened in the DVR space? Marty, the lack of standardization been a real impediment on advertising in DVR?
It's exactly that, and again, it's important not to confuse. Forward-thinking advertisers are certainly willing to experiment and do a lot, and are willing to pay real money into those experiments. But that's different. The R&D budgets are very, very different from the actual marketing budgets, which are, of course, enormous. And as you scale up, you've got to bridge that gap from this is an R&D thing that I'm very interested in and I hope works to this is part of my practical decision-making of how I'm marketing my product. And that requires this practicality, this ease. Someone mentioned about, there's a media buyer. There's real human beings inside these agencies. They have these enormous budgets, and they have a checklist. I've got to get GRPs covering all these demos at this certain level. And any human being is going to say, I'm going to take the shortest route to completing that list. That means what's easiest. And if I have to go to 8 different places and do things 8 different ways, I'm always going to choose going to the one place, doing it the one way instead. Even if the 8 different ways might have certain advantages, it's just not practical.
Dean, is that what you're finding as well on the DVR side?
We're really not as involved in that as much, so I can't really address that.
And by the way, I just want to add that from there's no advertisers on the panel here today, but there's no resistance from the advertising community to all these wonderful new technologies. There's a great embracing of it. So we have that fortunate thing where we're not swimming upstream. We are actually answering a demand for new ways to market products. And that's wonderful, especially since the dollars are so big. But it's got to be offered in a very practical way.
So that takes us to sort of the website of the world. Marty, what's happening with the migration of 30-second spots to webcasts of the same shows that are on linear?
Again, it plays a lot like VOD in that you can't use the normal inventory load. You have to load the ads differently. There's generally fewer ads. In that case, we are in control because it's our own media player, and so we can, allow for fast forwarding of ads or not, and that's an advantage. And the consumer seems to accept the trade-off of, well, it's free, great entertainment. And if the cost of that is the ad is going to run, as long as you don't over-clutter it, I'll accept that trade-off. Some consumers say, you know what, I'm going to pay TiVo $13 a month, or my cable company $8 a month, whatever it is, and I'm going to view it off hours because I won't accept the proposition of it's free programming and therefore it's worth the commercials. And you know what, you can't put all America into any one of those buckets. I think that we're going to find that we have to put the same show on different platforms, in different forms, with different kinds of inventory and ads to suit different tastes of the consumer.
So what is it going to look like in a year?
Good question. I'll leave that to my esteemed colleagues on the panel.
Well, I think you're starting to see it now, and there's panels to describe it, but you take a VOD content play that we have on our platform that you may think is kind of crazy, but we have karaoke on demand. And when I first heard that we had karaoke on demand, I thought, what the hell are we doing that for? But it gets, 3 million views a month in the on-demand environment. Well, how does it then, how do we repurpose it through Comcast.net or other broadband outlets? And again, start to toggle.
Do you have advertising on it?
Yeah, absolutely. So how do we start to toggle, this was back to my original point, there's not one single distribution point that's the panacea. It's an aggregation across the linear environment, 30-second spot on ESPN, driving people to the on-demand environment. And then it's the on-demand environment and linear environment driving people to the broadband environment. And how do you start to toggle across and create increased level of engagement across all three distribution points? I think Marty made the comment that we have to have the same content across all of those distribution points, and we're starting to see it now in a more pedestrian fashion around things like karaoke, but we're going to start to see it in more traditional content offerings as well.
I will make this much of a prediction. Because the internet has no barriers to entry, there are no gatekeepers, and if you want to do something, you can just go ahead and do it. I think that they will continue to expand at a faster pace than what we call interactive television or enhanced television, advanced television, whatever, where, again, there are various gatekeepers in cable and satellite and telco who have very complex infrastructures. And over time, I do believe that we will see more commonality and more standardization, but I think that's harder to do on the TV platform, and therefore I see its growth being robust, but perhaps not as speedy as the internet.
Will, you said you were launching on the internet.
Yeah, I mean, we have two things going. One is with TiVo, through TiVocast starting in January, we're gonna start supplying content to get to the television. And then the next wave is to create a broadband video companion to our VOD service. And our model is pretty much open syndication, which is that our sponsors ride with us everywhere that the content comes. So, YouTube will make it available for people to put on their MySpace pages. There are very popular sites in our genre that don't have broadband video, so we're essentially going to become like the AP, putting our player and making content available across those network sites, and then make it available, easily syndicatable for people to take and put on their own individual sites, even primarily at MySpace pages and YouTube channels.
So when we get down to, I'm sorry, did you want to?
Yeah, we're just, we as a company work with, programmers, operators, and for us, sort of, we're seeing a real blurring, maybe to Andy's point, between sort of on-demand and push VOD and broadband, and you have cable companies who are trying to figure out how to make their VOD assets, play in a player on a TV, on a PC screen. We have telcos that are figuring out how to use the same infrastructure to download video assets to a PC or to a set-top box and make that all work in the same way, so you don't really know the difference between whether you're watching VOD or DVR or a downloaded program that's sort of pushed to your device. So I think that's something that we're really taking to heart and sort of expecting that blur between broadband TV and sort of traditional screens, but different delivery methods to those screens is kind of important for our business and for our customers.
So when you get down to personalization, there's nothing more personal than everyone has a cell phone. So what are you all doing in a cell phone, on the mobile side, to either enhance advertising or enhance your content as it gets to the individualized level? Marty, your company had a recent failure. You've had some success. You've had some failure on the mobile side, mobile content side.
On the mobile side, and Terry's referring to the ESPN MVNO, the failure, and I really even wouldn't call it failure, but we're exiting being a virtual network. We're not exiting the content end of it. So the content end of it, was it?
Death with dignity.
Well said. The content end of it, providing the content to mobile platform and advertisers to the content, which you do special things with is terrific, and they've seen great success, and they'll continue to do that.
What are you doing?
Well, basically, what it is saying, that you're right, it's the ubiquitous device, you take it everywhere you go, it's by definition mobile. And for sports, getting what you want when you want it is really crucial. Getting the score, getting the standings, getting the whatever result, whatever. And so providing those highlights on mobile, on demand, whenever you want it, is valuable. And the number of ways you can weave advertising into that is very easy. It just happens to work very well. Again, running the network, well, that's something maybe telephone companies do better than media companies do. But it's a huge growth platform, and it's one where young people in particular not only are using it, but have a real affinity for using it. I mean, it's part of the culture to use your mobile phone in these sort of ways. So we see a lot of growth in that platform too.
Will, do you as well?
Yeah, I mean, but dealing with the mobile carriers is like dealing with the cable operators, right? Because they have total control and it's very difficult. But at least the cable operators understand video and programming, and they understand the direct link that means to subscribers. Phone carriers don't really get that as much. I mean, they're used to price and promotion at retail. That's how they look at the way they get subscribers, and the content on the phone doesn't mean as much to them. So it makes it very difficult to negotiate with cable operators. What our strategy is to create, with a couple of the service providers, create a package of content that they're able to use in certain promotions in certain markets. So where we have events, and where we're on, like Atlanta, where we're very strong, DC, where we're very strong, Detroit, places like Miami, where we're very strong, we will have events in conjunction with the service providers. And there, it will allow us to drive subscriptions for the service provider, capture information from people who are live at the events using mobile, and then drive them back to the on-demand platform. But it's not like that's not a cash and carry business for us now. I mean, obviously, Disney figured it out too, but for us too, it's not a cash and carry business. It's like, let's start taking baby steps, drive the things they care most about, which is subscriptions, and then use that to ultimately become a video provider.
The good news in that regard is you do have all these telephone companies who are in this, life and death battle to gain their subscribers. And they know things like having exclusive content, certain things, Sprint got the NFL and so forth, is a big differentiator. And so they are willing to do some, very interesting deals to get content like ESPN content or any unique content onto their platform. It's true, they have a long way to go in terms of understanding how to deal with content companies, but the deal environment is very good. And that's good for both programmers and the advertisers.
And does Comcast have a strategy for mobile?
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning, just taking a step back, I know this panel's focused on advertising, and that's what we're talking about today, but if you look at the Comcast business model, we're in the subscription business, if you will. And when you look at the advertising component of Comcast's overall business, Comcast did, I'll make up the number of round figures, it's public, but about $1.8 billion in advertising probably this year on a net basis. That represents less than 10% of the company's total revenue as an organization. But what's important to recognize is that it represents probably closer to 20% of the company's free cash flow. So here's this publicly held organization with tremendous financial pressure from a Wall Street perspective that sees here's this growth engine from a cash flow standpoint. So toggling back to the subscription business model, I think historically might have looked at cable companies as utilities at best and perhaps monopolies at worst, and some of you may still. But the reality is that a decade ago, there was no competition for video. Now with RBox and as Marty's describing, and other wireless providers and satellite guys, there's tremendous competition in the marketplace. So for us to retain and grow our subscriber base, we have to bring new products and services in the market, whether it's video, broadband, phone in the home, and wireless. So our, we entered into an agreement, back to your question, Terry, with Sprint Nextel. So we want to come out into the marketplace and offer all of those services. And the good news is we offer those services. Now there's recognition on the corporate parent company standpoint to say advertising needs to play a role in all of those products, wireless included, to underwrite the cost of that infrastructure. And historically, the separation of church and state between advertising and the cable operator business was a fairly significant wall of China. That has been brought down through the contribution from cash flow bills.
Do you see advertising as mobile as a viable platform for advertising?
Yeah, I think it'll be a niche. I think it'll be another aggregation of impressions. And, to Terry's point, if, you're probably not going to watch a half-an-hour episode on your mobile phone, but if you want to see ESPN Sports Center top 10 plays of the day, and how might that live in an on-demand environment, and how might that live in a broadband environment? So absolutely.
Terry, you asked, what do you think is going to happen in a year? One of the things that I think Andrew's pointing it out quite eloquently, that you're going to see more and more advertisers have a three-screen strategy for their advertising. So they're going to look at it from how do we use wireless to drive to TV, how do we use the internet to drive to wireless, and vice versa, so that you'll have a confluence of touch points with the consumer on every device that they could possibly handle. And that's why being able to measure it on all those platforms is so key, and to understand how one is influencing the other.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on probably where everything's going. Just out of curiosity, how many people in here have an iPod? Quite a number. And the reason why we love the iPod, or a lot of people love it, is because you kind of feel in control. You don't have to listen to the commercials anymore and a lot of other things. But I believe you're going to see more and more content go from linear to nonlinear over the next year, and eventually over time, after you miss the premiere, you'll always be able to watch the show on demand, similar to what you do with an iPod. So over the next year, I see that's where the industry's headed.
Questions? Yes, sir.
A lot of discussions around the interactive advertising and the new online advertising directed around the car companies and movie companies, and people who are grasping this pretty quickly. That seems to be leaving out some of the bigger segments of the industry, the P&Gs, the Unilevers. And what are you guys doing to try and get those guys involved in the media?
They get it, and I'll use P&G as a prime example of a leader who gets it. And you say, well, how do you deal with packaged goods or soft drinks or something like that? And one thing they're finding out more and more is what your product is doesn't determine whether you can produce an entertaining ad or not. And you find, Geico has, for example, seen its insurance, and yet it's seen its business just explode almost entirely on the back of some very, very clever, entertaining advertising. The caveman thing, the gecko thing, the actors translating normal people. And people respond to that. I think you're going to see a lot of that, and that can apply to absolutely any category. The second thing I think you're going to see that people like P&G are leaders in is providing more value. Again, something as simple as a coupon, but to say, hey, if you're seeing this ad and you press the button on your computer or the one click on your remote, the set-top box knows who you are, or you can just print out right then and there a coupon. I've actually made it worth your while to do this. And they totally get it. They're the marketing geniuses, and it's not them that's holding it back. It's the question of, is the technology there that can be provided, again, on a basis where P&G can say, I'm going to produce one commercial, I need it to do this sort of thing in terms of engagement and adding value and interactivity. I need to know that it can run on, if it's on TV, on every distributor, on every platform, on every network.
And that's where I disagree. I really think that down the road with this interactive technology, P&G is going to be able to develop a suite of ads and to have addressability. I think that's going to be what's going to be important to P&G. is making sure that they can relate their brand to each one of you and make you want to buy that brand when you go to the supermarket. So just one flavor throughout the whole United States, I don't think is going to fit everyone. You look at our Hispanic population, you look at our Asian population, our Black population, each person relates differently to a brand, and I feel that's where we're going to have to go with advertising.
Are there any advertisers or sponsors in the room? So it's just curious. All right, here's what's gonna happen in a year. Sure, number one, I'm not gonna blow any money, right? So what's gonna happen in a year is what happened for the last 25 years. Whoever can come and help the advertiser figure out how they can do their jobs and leave by 5 o'clock is gonna get the money. Right? You know, it gives them Super Bowl tickets, front row seats at the Stones. That's who's gonna get the money. So if it turns out that Andy and Comcast is able to figure out how you can come do one-stop shopping, like all that mobile spectrum they just bought with Sprint, combine that with the broadband portal they just opened up with the VOD and all the linear channels, if that's what allows you to reach as many people as possible and still get them out by 5, that's who gets the money. If ESPN figures it out, that's who's gonna get the money. If it's the networks who figure it out, that's who's gonna get the money. If there's some third-party aggregator who emerges, that's who is gonna get the money. It's not based on how many people you reach and how much media consumption happens. MySpace has dominated in a certain age category. It's not even close between Yahoo and AOL. MySpace is totally dominated. But their mistake in the very beginning, you know, before they sold, was they didn't have the capacity to go make the advertiser's job easy. They just walked in and said, hey, we have all this reach, tell us what you want to do with it. That's not how it works. The way it works, I mean, these guys will tell you, here is what you need to do with all your money. And if you read it over now, you know, let your lawyers read the fine print, but you read this PowerPoint over now by 5, and you're going to reach all these people and to make their job easier. That's the only reason why you can't predict what's going to happen next year, because you don't know who that entity is that's going to make that advertiser's job easier.
This was helpful for me, Will. Now I understand why we actually own sports teams is for the tickets. I was really curious about it.
The good seats.
Yes.
There's no doubt about it. There's never any doubt about it.
And now that Philadelphia's losing, you're ready to get rid of the team. Take is not worth anything.
Well, I guess you could see.
The big difference is it used to be anybody who provided the audience could get the advertising. And that's still true to a certain degree. The value of an audience doesn't go away. But now it's about providing that audience and being able to provide a level of engagement and or value to the consumer. Engagement and or value. And the good news is every platform that Terry's talked about, the television platform, broadband, internet, mobile, all have the capability now of doing that. So the good news, the advertiser is clearly one of the winners. They're going to have more effective advertising moving forward. The consumer, I think, is one of the winners because, one, they have a great deal more control than ever, but there's going to be more value added or entertainment added into advertising. And so then it comes down to, all right, well, which of the players, which platforms are going to, succeed here? And that's where it gets tricky. Anybody, however, has the potential. I mean, all these platforms are interactive, all can drive engagement, all can drive value. Now, who executes?
Question?
Well, in my humble opinion, broadband is the only thing that's going to save television. The platforms will be won within how many years? You're already seeing a trend where kids coming out of college that didn't have access to cable don't pick it up when they move into their first apartment, their first house, just like they don't pick up a traditional hardline phone. They're able to get most of their content through the DSL line or hopefully a high-speed cable, and that's an unrelenting trend. So you have this generation and all subsequent generations going forward are getting their content the way they want it, when they want it, how they want it. Does NBC even need to be a network? Why don't you just be a program supplier and put your broadband channel up now.
I'm not that thinking about it because they're hurt, I'm sure they're thinking about it.
You're right, from the consumer point of view, it's just about the content and what platform, where it's coming from is becoming less and less relevant, and it will disappear. The distinction will disappear. It'll still be there, you're getting it from some source or another, but you don't care and even know. But that's why I would personally rather be a content company than any of these platform companies.
Andy, agree?
What's that?
Do you agree?
I'm just looking to get rid of some tickets.
Stop Hub.
No, I think the reason we're trying to get into the wireless business, or why we're looking to get into other platforms, is exactly the point. My kids, 10, 8, and 5, they're not going to have, as you described, they're not going to have a landline. So what role does the MSO play? Is it beyond, is it purely as a distributor? What business models come out of it? And from an advertising standpoint, one could argue that the cable MSOs shouldn't even be in the ad business, that what we should do is simply enable that technology, whether it's addressability or VOD or other functionality, to content providers, and we become a toll plaza in the course of those segmentations. So I think the ability for our business to adapt to that changing landscape is going to be a critical one.
Got a question?
Yeah, just around place-based advertising with the advent of the movement from VOD to DVR, DVR to broadband, and broadband into mobile. If you look at the spectrum of the advertiser's perspective of being able to brand messaging and drop right down into call to action, can I get just across the panel opinion around what people might want to use and leverage as an advertiser for thinking this through and where you want to place your emphasis?
It really depends on what the goal of the campaign is. That's the best way to do it. Some advertisers on the national level are more into branding. I know, for example, our company, a great deal of our revenue comes from local clients. So they're more into what's called call to action type of messages. Our biggest segment of advertising is the local car dealers. And one of the biggest forms of advertising, as you know, that's out there, or it is the biggest form, is direct mail. And a lot of local car advertisers love when you walk in with a penny saver ad and they see the guy walk through the door and says, hey, it's working, because they show this piece of paper as they walk through the door. Well, the way we've addressed that is now that we have the ability to send information in the mail based on how you respond. So I don't know if that answers your question, but there are different levels of what you're trying to accomplish.
One of the things, I'm not sure I understood the question entirely, but just like the distribution types, platforms are all really merging. The idea of call to action brand awareness is also merging. You don't have to make the choice. You can, in one ad, have both, have all those things. Have everything you've always done for brand awareness and insert a layer, an interactive layer of call to action. And when you look at an advertiser's budgets, traditional advertising is huge, but direct marketing is, depending on how you measure it, just as large, maybe even a little larger. And television, the internet, have never gotten much, if anything, of those budgets. And now, with this level of interactivity, if you really understand what direct marketers try to do and the type of call to action they do try and get and the response they try and get, you can attack those budgets and for the first time have twice the amount of money available to you, if you can execute well, than you ever had available to you before. That's a huge upside. Huge.
Question? Braxton, you're doing a lot overseas. Your company is obviously very heavily involved in interacting overseas. What's an application that's being done in Europe or somewhere else in the world that you guys think would be great if it was done in the US? Would work?
Betting on sports on television.
What legal activity?
Change some laws. That's actually probably one of the more profitable, areas our customers actually use interactivity and combine sort of video and interactivity and video on demand. Other than that, I think certainly IPTV in general has taken off more outside of the U.S. than it has so far in the U.S. And we've seen tons of applications of really kind of combining something we're talking about here, where you can do DVR, VOD, linear, do advertising across all those platforms and do it in a way that's sort of seamless to the user and to the advertiser. And I think that's really interesting, and it's something that some of the telcos here are looking at, and certainly the big operators here could do. There's more legacy sort of technology issues. I think the advantage some of the European guys have had, especially, and actually some of the Asian guys, they had a clean slate that they started with 1 or 2 years ago and said, I can put a certain level of set-top box and a certain type of technology, it's all digital, it's all addressable, and that's, you kind of are seeing a glimpse of how a lot of stuff we're talking about could work in the U.S. to solve some of those technology problems.
Well, with that, I've been told we have to close. And thank you all for attending and.